I do want women to know that there is an alternative to suppressing their bodies with hormones, that they can see their body as a good and they can live in that body holistically.
Totally. Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
Join co-hosts Jamie Rocci and Teresa Kenny as they educate women about the beauty of the feminine design and empower women to take charge of their health.
They're going to be so amazing. You're going to be so empowered by understanding your feminine genius and your hormone genius. I don't think I could live my whole life knowing this and not sharing it with anyone.
Hello, our Hormone Genius listeners. I am here today with my co-host Teresa Kenny and Olivia Chasteen. Olivia is the director of SymptoPro Fertility Education. We have not really gone into SymptoPro as a method of charting. We've probably mentioned it here and there, but we're going to dig into SymptoPro today, and I'm really excited. It's, of course, a method of family planning. In addition to Olivia's role as a SymptoPro education director, she is a certified lactation consultant. So very formed in women's healthcare. She's also a wellness professional and a volunteer instructor for her local Catholic diocese. Olivia lives in Wisconsin with her husband and children, and she's passionate about helping women and families find healthier alternatives, especially when it comes to fertility. So, Olivia, you will just be the perfect episode guest for us today because, again, we haven't talked much about SymptoPro, and we really, we talk a lot about health and we talk a lot about charting and fertility and hormones. But in terms of a specific charting method, it's been a while. So we're excited to have you on today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
Yeah. So we're just going to jump right in. Olivia, what is SymptoPro? And what makes SymptoPro as a charting method different from some of the other methods that we hear about today in the fertility awareness world?
Right. So SymptoPro is a sympto-thermal method, which means that for a woman who's using the SymptoPro method, she's going to be charting her cervical fluid, and then she's also going to be charting her basal body temperature. And that's what's going to help her determine when her fertile patterns are. I know there are also a few other sympto-thermal methods that are out there. Like couple-to-couple league is another very, very common one. And we have some of the same basis for our research, but most of the SymptoPro method is based on the research of Dr. Joseph Retzer. He was an Austrian doctor, and it was kind of developed in the late 70s and early 80s. So there are some differences between them, but when it comes to the big overall picture, we're still charting the same signs.
So I get a lot of patients, Olivia, that ask me about temperature. And obviously, you're going to give us a rundown of how this all works. But I think what I want to understand, and even for myself, I've done Creighton model. I've never done the LH strips. I've really just focused on mucus. But I think temperature is that cross-check that can be very reliable, but it also is confusing to me sometimes on which temperature kind of device to use. And I feel like because there's so many more devices today that we are using for temperature, I just want to kind of go through, again, how it all works, but what are the devices that you think work the best in 2025 going forward?
That's actually a very good question, something that comes up a lot with our couples because we live in a modern world, and to ask a woman to wake up at the same time every day and take her temperature at the same time can be hard. So we have a lot of women who are interested in the wearable devices that automatically take your temperature for you, like TempDrop. And what we, as an organization, we don't necessarily endorse those methods that take their temperatures automatically, because really the research behind SymptoPro, the sympto-thermal methods in general, is really based on taking your temperature with just a regular thermometer. So you're either going to do that orally, and you're taking those temperatures and you're charting them on wherever it is that you're charting. So that's what the research is based on. So when it comes to effectiveness, that's what we're going to defer to and what we would recommend to couples. So getting a digital thermometer that is going to be a basal body thermometer. But now, we also do work with couples who want to use the more technical and updated things where they, like I said, the wearables where it can take your temperature for you. And what we recommend is that essentially you take your temperature with your thermometer and take your temperature with this new device and do that over a cycle or two and see how well that correlates for you. Just because some of the stuff with the wearables is proprietary. We don't necessarily know how it how it relates to the science behind the SymptoPro method. And so we ask couples to work with their instructor to help make sure that that's a good option for them and it's going to be reliable. But we go back to the basis of just a regular digital thermometer.
So this is important because many women who may be tuning into Hormone Genius Podcast and didn't catch us at the very beginning, like in season 1, and for those of you listening who have not ever gone through season 1, 2, 3, truly just that first season, we lay the groundwork on the genius of the fertility cycle. But let's remind our listeners kind of why temperature is important in the first place. So Olivia, you mentioned SymptoPro, it takes into account like our cervical mucus, but it also takes into account our temperature. And so as women and men maybe even are listening to this episode today, they may be wondering, why does temperature matter? Like what's the big deal about that? So can you give our listeners an overview of why the temperature matters and how it shifts throughout the course of our cycle?
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that, like when I first learned the SymptoPro method, I had no idea. So my eyes were completely opened, and it's crazy. And as an instructor working with clients, it's so fun to see so many women like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was a thing. So what happens is that the start of a cycle is day 1 of your period. And throughout that first part of your cycle, your temperature is going to be lower. So when you wake up and you take your temperature, it's going to be, most likely it's going to be lower than the 98.6. And then as you reach ovulation, progesterone actually increases your body temperature. And so once you've ovulated and your body has started creating progesterone, your body temperature rises usually about a half degree. And you can see that in your charts when you're charting your daily temperatures, and all of a sudden your line jumps up. And then it stays high for the rest of the cycle. So after you've ovulated, during the luteal phase of your cycle, your temperature is about a half a degree higher than it is the first half of the cycle. And that's, like I said, it's just really cool to see, especially for someone who hasn't previously had that level of body literacy, to be able to look at that and say, wow, like I had no idea this was happening in every cycle. So it is really interesting to see.
So progesterone, again, just to recap, the hormone progesterone is only made after ovulation. So that hormone only comes into play after the egg is released. And progesterone is thermogenic. So it raises body temperature. So I always think it's easiest to almost like divide the cycle into 2 halves, right? You're either before ovulation or after ovulation. And, this is like an easy way to basically kind of make the cycle biphasic. And so when we talk about temperature, we're talking about like this biphasic temperature shift where you have the baseline of your temperature, which is kind of determined at the beginning because not everybody has the exact same baseline temperature. So the unique person kind of finds their baseline temperature, and that allows them to kind of have like what do they call the line there? I can't think of it. The line that your baseline line is?
Some people have what's called the cover line. We don't use cover lines in SymptoPro, but we go based off of we look for the last 6 lows. So you look for your last 6 low temperatures before you see that temperature shift. But yes, from cycle to cycle, a woman's temperatures are usually the same.
Right. I think the cover line is helpful. I mean, even I have an Aura ring, and there's like a cover line in a sense that allows you to kind of see that shift easier. It divides it in half. So I think that cover line can be helpful. I do want you to talk about basal body temperature, and also with the thermometers, like is there a special thermometer, even though you're saying just a digital thermometer? Isn't there a reason to get one that's called a basal body thermometer, and explain why that is?
Yeah, so a basal body thermometer is going to be it's going to be more specific. It's going to pick up those temperature shifts a little bit. It's just going to be slightly more accurate, I guess, is the term I'm looking for here. Because when you're charting your temperature, you're looking for these small shifts, and being able to pick up on those is going to be important in terms of charting your fertility. I mean, you're making family planning decisions based on what your temperature is looking like. So you really want something that's going to be accurate. And so for a basal body thermometer, actually, a lot of the thermometers you get in the store are basal body thermometers. Like if you go to your local drugstore and you get a thermometer, you might not be using it for family planning purposes, and you might not be charting your temperature daily, but in a lot of cases, it is a basal body thermometer. And the way to tell is that when you take your temperature, Usually it beeps after a minute and then it has your recorded temperature on it. If you keep the thermometer in, does the temperature continue to change? If the temperature continues to change after that 1 minute beep, it's a basal body thermometer because it's still recording after that beep. And that's what you want, because normally when you're taking your temperature, what we would recommend is that you keep that thermometer in for at least 2 minutes. So you're going to go in for 1 minute after that beep. And that's just to get a more accurate reading on what your temperature is in the morning. Because again, we're looking for those small shifts. So that difference there between taking your temperature at 1 minute versus your temperature at 2 minutes, it might be the difference of, I didn't have my blanket on me this morning when I woke up. And so you just want to get your actual read versus something that might be just temporary or related to your environment.
Got it. I know my husband and I, early in our marriage, we learned the sympto-thermal method, and that was all I knew really fertility awareness to be at the time. And of course, I learned about like ovulation only methods, or mucus only methods, I should say. But it was exciting. It was kind of fun to see how everything plays together. I'd say that was the thrill of it for me, being a total nerd and learning this for the first time. It wasn't just, I do have cervical fluid and that indicates, upcoming ovulation, but that there are other parts of our body that indicate that we're fertile or that we've passed fertility, in this case of an increasing temperature or a high temperature. So it was very fun to see that. But one thing, and I'm sure you've heard this 1 billion million times from your clients that you work with, is, well, what about the times I wake up in the night? Or what if I take medicine at night, cough medicine, I have a cold, or I have a glass of wine? And how do those lifestyle factors or just life in general affect our temperature? And is this method for women who have a difficult time sleeping through the whole night?
That is another good question, and definitely one that comes up often. You just think about, as moms, how many times do you get up with your kids throughout the night? And when you have a new baby, how many times are you waking up? And what we always say, especially for someone who's just starting out and learning the method, is that if you aren't sure, just chart everything. Put all those notes in there. Put that you had a glass of alcohol. Put that you were up at this time. And if we have to consider those temperatures as disturbed, then we're not going to include those when we're making our calculations for your fertile window. We have different rules that we can rely on if your temperature pattern is not undisturbed, as we would call it. So if you had your glass of alcohol and maybe your temperature went up or maybe it went down, and we wouldn't include that temperature when we're figuring out when your fertile window is. Yeah, our best advice is to have clients take their temperature as consistently as they can. So if they're working shift work, it doesn't matter what time they wake up, but to take their temperature at the same time, or not at the same time, to take their temperature as soon as they wake up and to chart that, and to have at least 2 hours of rest prior to getting up and taking their temperature. So even if they woke up in the middle of the night, that's okay, as long as they have this 2 hours of uninterrupted rest before they get up and get their temperature taken. And as they have more charting data, they'll be able to figure out, is that a good pattern for them? Do they need help reading their pattern? Because they can always reach out to their instructor, and we'll be able to help them figure out some way to interpret their chart.
So it's always important to think about goals when charting, right? Because some people are charting for health reasons, and many people are charting for fertility reasons, either to get pregnant or maybe they're avoiding pregnancy. When I think of temperature, I've often thought of temperature as retrospective information, meaning that it kind of is telling you that something did already happen, and then you're able to know that, versus prospective information. But as time has gone on, and especially like with new devices like the Natural Cycles app and now the Aura Ring, I'm starting to see that, obviously temperature is being used prospectively, meaning that you're interpreting fertility in a more prospective way. So I guess from a temperature standpoint and what you were saying about finding the fertile window, can you explain, as the way SymptoPro interprets it, how does a woman understand when she can get pregnant and when she cannot get pregnant using a temperature-based symptom? And I know that's not the only biomarker you look at, but how does temperature factor into the fertile window?
Right, and that is a good point to mention, that a lot of the temperature data that we look at, it is retrospective, in that we can't apply certain rules to your temperature until you've had so many number of days that you have this higher temperature. And where temperature really comes into play is around that window of ovulation and when has ovulation passed. Because once ovulation has passed and we can confirm that with that sustained temperature rise, that's really what we're looking at, where we have that biphasic temperature shift. And when that temperature shifts and we can apply our sympto-thermal rules to that shift, that's when we say, okay, ovulation has occurred and now you are in the luteal phase. You're, at least we don't pinpoint when ovulation is, but we can say that because you have this sustained temperature rise, there's a very good chance you're past ovulation. And the research shows that when you apply these rules, they're 99% effective, showing that you can't get pregnant because you're in the luteal phase. So, especially for couples who need like a very reliable form, just focusing on intercourse during the luteal phase, you have, a 99% chance that you're going to be involved and not conceiving a baby if you focus on that, because that's what the temperature shift really shows us, is when that shift happens from the follicular phase to the luteal phase after ovulation.
Yeah, it feels like, or it seems like, people who just really need a cross check, because again, our body's telling us we're amping up, we're getting close to ovulation, we're noticing this cervical mucus. And while we can say, again, so many times to our clients, once you have mucus and then you have none, there's been a shift, that even we can say that there's been a shift. And while that is true, and it is a very effective way to avoid pregnancy, that the difficulty is the confidence factor when charting mucus only. And again, my husband and I, we used the sympto-thermal method and then switched to Creighton, which is mucus only. We had great with that. But there are different seasons of life where you really are just more motivated to avoid pregnancy, and that cross-check does provide peace of mind. And so for people who like data and for people who need kind of more of that peace of mind, that's where I see the temperature really shining. But one of the questions I was thinking about asking you, but you answered it, but I'm going to ask it and then give like a little elevator pitch. What's your elevator pitch to practice the SymptoPro method over other sympto-thermal methods? Although, of course, we know all methods there's always a place and there's a season. But give us an elevator pitch on the SymptoPro method.
I think it comes back to the temperature, being able to, as you mentioned, to see that shift and say, wow, like my body is doing this. Because that's when I'm working with clients, that's what they're so surprised about. They're even though they might have, a beautiful looking mucus pattern, what they're so surprised about is that they can see that temperature shift and like, wow, like this method might actually work for me because I can do this. I can see this. And that confidence factor, especially for someone who is coming in not knowing anything about charting and these different signs that your body has in terms of fertility, and being able to see that and understand that is going to apply to you. I think that's the biggest thing that would draw people to a sympto-thermal method. And like you said, there are different times and seasons. So certainly we have couples who come in and they're like, I can't do this temperature thing. I can't do it. And I'm like, okay, great. You can do another method. I'm not your instructor, but I'd be happy to send you off to somebody else, because I don't want to turn people off from NFB just because they can't take their temperature every day. So there are certainly different options out there. But for the women who are committed to that and they do like being able to see that pattern, it is just really reassuring to say, okay, my temperature has shifted. I know where I am in my cycle.
So let's talk about like maybe examples of patients or clients that it really is maybe not a good fit for. And I know like this is a loaded question, but I'm thinking of someone who has really long and irregular cycles, or maybe they're perimenopausal and their hormones are all over the place. What are there certain patients that just like with temperature, it's just harder to do it because of the cycle and what's going on underlying in their body? So is that a situation where you ever say, hey, I just think temperature for you is probably not going to be as easy? Not that it doesn't work. It's just that with your particular pattern, maybe it's going to make it more stressful.
I think the biggest section that we see, where the biggest time in a woman's reproductive life where we say your temperature is probably not going to be super important for you right now, is postpartum. just because we don't know how long, especially if she's breastfeeding. If she's not breastfeeding, we have a pretty good idea when her cycles are going to return. But if she is breastfeeding, that can be such a highly variable time in how long it takes for her cycles to return. And so at that point, a lot of times their instructors will let them know, okay, here are your options. But most of the charting that we rely on at that time goes back to essentially a mucus-only method, where we're just looking for her mucus patterns because she's up a bunch of times during the night. She's nursing her baby, and the sleep definitely is a bit more erratic during that postpartum phase. And so I think that's the main point in a woman's life where the temperature phase or the temperature charting just it kind of falls off the chart, so to speak.
Yeah, I could see breastfeeding definitely being one of the hardest. And that's why I think a lot of people are appreciating the LH monitor, the Marquette system, creating a protocol that just made it a little bit easier for a lot of people. But Olivia, we're going to take a break and just mention our podcast sponsor, We Heart Nutrition. Jamie and I are so excited. I keep hearing about my patients trying out and loving the products of We Heart Nutrition. And I'm just grateful that they are sponsoring our podcast. Jamie and I really love their products. Why? Because they care about the research around nutrients. They care about the quality of their product, and they care about what their money is supporting as well. And that aligns with our mission on Hormone Genius. So we really want you to check out We Heart Nutrition. They have a quiz you can take. It takes just a minute, and it tells you really what they think your body may need. And then you can get a 20% off your first order using the code GENIUS, GENIUS. Use the code GENIUS for 20% off. We Heart Nutrition. Thank you so much. All right, Olivia. So we've talked about, a lot of things in relationship to SymptoPro. I still want to go back to the technology piece because, again, this is a younger generation. And we want to encourage the young women out there that you can do a natural method for family planning. That this information is empowering, that it does work, that there's a lot of science behind it. But I know it can be overwhelming because we have all of these now, femtech devices. And I'm thinking of, again, Temp Drop, the Oura Ring, the Ava Temp Monitor, Whoop, the Apple Watch. I mean, there's just so many different things now. Can you just, again, focus a little bit on, I know you said that you encourage because the research was based in SymptoPro on the basal thermometer, but what if someone's using an Oura Ring and they're like, this works great for me? How are you guys trying to implement the newer technologies into this system?
Yeah. So right now, I think we just want more data in order to be able to say that this is an effective way of charting your temperature and that it is going to be correlated in the research to taking your temperature with a digital thermometer. I don't think the research is quite there yet. I think it's getting better. Obviously, as there's more interest, there is more impetus for research to be developed around this area. And I think that's important because, like you mentioned, there are a lot of people who want to use those devices. And that is, certainly that's fine. If that's, as instructors, we caution our clients. We don't tell them you can't use this or you shouldn't use this. We say, this is what the research is based on. And I can help you by, I would suggest, like I mentioned, to take your temperature both ways for a cycle or two and to see what those patterns look like. Do they look similar? Or are they kind of all over the place and look a little wonky? Because if you're taking your temperature with both methods and you've done that for 2 cycles and your patterns are very similar, you're going to have that confidence to be able to say, okay, I do think that this is a reliable way for me to take my temperature. And yes, it does take some more work in the upfront, but at the end of the day, it comes down to what client preference is, and they get to make those decisions because it's their fertility. And if they understand that the research is not based on this, but they're willing to take that risk, so to speak, and go with a different temperature taking option, they can do that. And their instructor is going to keep working with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could see too, another benefit of a thermometer is it's just cheap. Really inexpensive. So when we think about managing our health and making sure we understand a fertility cycle, and to me, while the thermometer may present some perceived barriers, whether real or not, like you're sharing, you only really know the effectiveness if you're checking your both temps at the same time. But so that's like a perceived barrier is just the time it takes to take the temperature. But another perceived barrier, actually real barrier, is the cost of things. And so for people who may feel that they can't chart their cycle because they don't have the money or the means, really all you need are your eyes and you need it, and then a temperature or a thermometer, I should say. You could buy that for less than $10 at Walgreens or whatever. So I could imagine that being another pitch to support the use of the sympto-thermal method. Olivia, in your experience working with women, what have been some of the more challenging cases? And what was the cause, or what was living underneath the challenging case? When I say challenging case, I mean challenging cycle patterns. So perhaps maybe there was a temperature shift that only lasted a couple days and then it went down again. Or, so kind of walk through some of the interesting cycle patterns and what those cycle patterns may indicate.
Right. I think the biggest one that comes to mind is clients that have signs of PCOS, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed, when they have those long, irregular cycles. And especially if they're going to have multiple mucus like patches within that cycle, it's discouraging from the client perspective, because they're taking the course, and the course itself a lot of times goes over more normal looking cycles, more typical cycles. And that's not because we don't have ways of helping them interpret their cycles, but that's just because, there's only so much time to sit in class and to teach a group of people. So a lot of times the course material does focus on those more typical cycles. So for a woman coming in who has irregular cycles, it's just to see that, okay, it's another month of charting and I still can't apply any of these rules to my chart. It does get discouraging in the beginning. And, as an instructor, sometimes that their charts are very hard to interpret too. And, unless you have an instructor who's qualified like as a medical professional, you also we can't diagnose someone. And another hard point from the instructor perspective is to tell a woman, your charts are not typical. There is something going on here, and I want you to get some support for this. So I'm going to tell you to go to your doctor. And she goes to her doctor and kind of gets pushed aside or told that her only option is to go on a pill. And that is another thing that's just really hard as an instructor, to be told that all we can offer you is the pill. And it's no, there is something going on. Her cycle is not normal, and we have to do some investigation here to try to get to the root cause so that she can hopefully get healthier and maybe have a better cycle pattern. Because if she's in a healthier place, it's going to be easier to interpret her chart. So I think those are the bigger things that come up in terms of what's going to be difficult as an instructor.
Have you seen, Olivia, with your clients that have PCOS, and again, that may make temperature a little less reliable if you have irregular cycles, but without using birth control, is there, someone that you can think of that, I don't know, they just changed their lifestyle, or maybe they did some targeted PCOS supplements and their SymptoPro chart just started to change and really, really fall into a balance? Is that something you ever see when they get holistic treatment for PCOS? Do their charts change and look much, much better?
Yes, they do change. And that's something that's another reason why charting is so wonderful. Because if you are experiencing some type of hormonal imbalance, you can use charting not for family planning purposes, but you can use it as kind of just, this is how I'm keeping track of my health. And this is, I'm going to introduce this supplement and see if it changes my chart. Or I'm going to start exercising or eating better and see how that changes your chart. Because you can get real-time data that just gives, and it's, other than as you mentioned, other than the cost of getting the thermometer, this is a very inexpensive thing to do. And you can see on your chart what your patterns are and how they're shifting. And it's invaluable. You can't put a price on that, to be able to see that in real time, that this is making a difference for me or it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I have a couple questions, and we're nearing the end. In the back of my mind, I've still been wondering, what's the difference between SymptoPro and couple-to-couple league? And I know you mentioned that they're different, but I just maybe a little bit different, but how different? And then my second question is cervical position, and if there's any checking with that. And so those are my two questions.
Yeah. And actually, your second question very much plays into the first one.
Oh, I kind of was maybe wondering that. And I thought, should I even ask the second or should I see how you answer the first? So yeah, go for it.
Yes. So couple to couple, I've never taken couple to couple, so I can't, say that my answer is 100% correct. But in terms of my understanding of the couple to couple program, their emphasis for charting often goes back to cervical mucus and the cervical position and charting those. So that's their main focus. And with SymptoPro, our main focus is the cervical mucus and then sensations that you feel. We do have couples who do chart cervical position, and we do teach that, just like couple to couple also teaches sensations. So each of the methods teaches the 3 signs, but their focus is on cervical mucus and the cervix position, and our focus is on cervical mucus and sensations. And we find, roughly maybe a third of our couples will chart the cervix. The data that SymptoPro is based on with Dr. Retzer really focus more heavily on the sensation and the cervical mucus. So that's what we really, teach first. And then I know for some women, they don't like the idea of charting their cervix or having to check that every day. And for some women, they find it really difficult. They can't seem to find a good pattern, but they certainly can if they want to. And for some women, it's great. It's their best way to tell when their fertile window is opening or closing.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, I can't imagine, but I just myself, it's thinking of every woman out there, probably your least kind of like, oh, that's what I'd like to do is check my cervical position daily. But, it's hard enough to have to touch cervical mucus and start to get used to, understanding if it's stretchy and clear and all that. And then you're like, oh, okay, so you're going to have me touch my cervix. And right now I know there's a lot of women out there are thinking, how do you even do that? It's really honestly not that hard. Like if you're in the shower, you can feel your cervix, just so everybody knows. If you put your index finger into your vagina, it's just up there at the top of the vagina. And what Olivia is speaking to is that the cervix itself, which is the passageway, right? It's the passageway for your womb or your uterus, but it has all these little mucus glands in it that produce the cervical fluid, right? But the actual cervix changes itself in terms of the softness or the consistency of how the cervix feels. And then also its position, which is crazy. It literally moves in your body based on your hormones. So I know that's a little detailed. And again, you would want an instructor to really kind of go over that with you. But just to kind of review, if people are wondering, what are they talking about? Cervical position. Literally you're putting your finger in your vagina, feeling the cervix in terms of where it's at and what it feels like. And, it's really getting in tune to what's going on, but it's kind of cool. Like you said, all of these things are truly what our bodies do in relationship to our fertility, in relationship to our hormones. And you can be empowered to totally understand your body. And that's the incredible good news about, having all these different methods that we have to really teach this awareness, this body literacy. So Olivia, as we wrap up, Jamie's going to ask a last question. But before she does that, just tell people, how many SymptoPro people are out there? How many teachers? How do you get a hold of a teacher if people are out there and they're like, this sounds like a method I'd be interested in learning about? Give us the details of SymptoPro, where to get the information, how to find a teacher.
Yeah. So if you go to symptopro.org, you can there's a couple different ways to take a course. You can either take a course online where it's on demand, you're watching videos, and then you have email follow-up for the most part with your instructor. And that can be done through symptopro.org. If you want a more live presentation, either in person or doing it virtually, through Zoom, you can go to symptopro.org again and then find an instructor. And we do have several instructors who do offer virtual classes, and they have a directory we have a directory on our website, and you can look for different instructors there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Olivia. So we talked about SymptoPro method today. We talked about temperature, and maybe some of our listeners didn't even realize that our temperature shifts after we ovulate, and kind of going into those details, Olivia. So we're so happy that you were on the show with us today. As usual, I would love to ask you the question I ask every guest. What do you wish every woman knew about her hormone genius?
I wish that more women understood that they had the confidence to be able to do this, and that their body's not broken, that they can chart this, and that even if they're experiencing symptoms right now, that's not normal. There are ways to find support or fixes for that from a holistic perspective, and that charting, especially once the initial learning phase takes a little while, but once you get into it, it really only takes like a minute a day. So how much different is that than popping a pill every day and remembering to do that at the same time every day? So it really it's not that much more of a commitment other than the initial learning phase, and you can do it. Your body is worth that, to be able to protect that and protect your fertility and understand it as well.
And Olivia, is there any websites for you personally, or any social media, or any way that people can keep in touch with you personally?
It's mostly just through the SymptoPro site. We do have, we are on Facebook. I think we're on Instagram and X, I think is what it's called now. I'm not super big into social media, but we do have a presence in all of those places. And then you can also reach me directly through the SymptoPro website.
Well, thank you, Olivia, for being on the Hormone Genius podcast. We really appreciate your information, and take care.
Yeah, well, thank you. I enjoyed our conversation today.
Thanks for listening to the Hormone Genius Podcast. Please remember to share our podcast with your friends and family, and also follow us on social media. If you were not aware, we have a YouTube channel. So if you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, we would appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. We are excited to journey alongside you as you discover the beauty and the genius of your hormones.